Hey everyone. Yeah, I know this is a little late. I'm sorry about that. I was busy trying to get things sorted out with my new phone, but yeah. But okay, so jumping right into it though, I guess the place to start with this episode is that it more or less puts a pin on the defeat of Draken Joe, but more than that, we also get a glimpse into his history as well. And when I first read this content in the manga, I said in my review at the time that Draken's story is kind of that of a reverse Zeref in the sense where, while the latter saw his immortality and living for eternity as a curse, he wanted to be free from, he lived for so long that he just wanted to embrace death. Draken, on the other hand, as we see, he was raised in an environment where it just wasn't, you were expected to die. He was a guinea pig, a lab rat, as said, and so he just wanted to live longer. He wanted to live longer than what he said he was going to live for, and so in that respect, I think as he grew older, he also started to see his immortality as a gift, one that, from his perspective, is a cure from the disease that is human imperfection, the ability to age, grow old. The ability to age and grow old, they do not but limit one's potential, and that's more or less why he seeks to live forever. Like initially, he just wanted to live longer, but eventually that mentality kind of got twisted into this idea that living a certain number of years, that living for a certain amount of time, is nothing but a curse in itself, and living forever is the gift. So, and while I still do stand by what I had said, at that time in that review, I think it is also interesting how characters like Draken and Zeref kind of represent two sides of the exact same coin in terms of humanity's view on death. On one side, there are those who fear death and run from it, and at every turn, because let's be honest, the idea of death is a scary concept, even if we eventually reach that point of embracing it. The road to get to that point, though, is one of fear that we overcome. Whereas on the other side, human beings do eventually reach a point in their lives where the idea of death sometimes feels comforting. So, and even to a point where sometimes sometimes death feels like a mercy for a lot of us. I know the idea of death being a mercy personally, because I've seen it happen dozens of times with many grandparents. So because of that, we just embrace it and learn to accept death as a natural flow of the universe. Like, it's something I've even come to accept, even though I'm still in my early 30s. And from that perspective, it is interesting to see how Mashima portrays these two extremes and how they both represent to both sides the exact same coin in that respect. With that said, yeah, as I said before, this is the episode where I wished Mashima had followed through with chopping off Weiss's arm, just as a way of showing no matter how the timelines change, there are some things that can't be undone, and just leaving us with some kind of. I think I would have liked it just with leaving Weiss with some kind of consequences and a reminder to Weiss, and reminded Weiss of how reckless he was, but as it is, it's fine. Because obviously the bigger thing to talk about, though, is that Shiki awakened his ether gear, full power and full awakening everything. Which, yeah, you could tell this is where the studio went full crazy with the animation and how they really wanted to capture the pressure and power of the Demon King. Like, this is Ziggy's power, and what it is that gave him renown as the Demon King throughout the universe. And honestly, the demonstration definitely lives up to the legend. Like, seriously, the idea of Shiki creating this equivalent of a black hole in the form of in that form is fucking nuts, and what he was able to do with it to defeat Draken, it's pretty fucking crazy. With that said, I do want to make a quick mention of how this happened, because I know there's going to be a lot of people who are just going to say it's power, friendship, and call it a day. But as you'll learn more and more as we go into overdrives and whatnot throughout this, as we go more and more into overdrives and what it takes to awaken them, it's. Overdrive in itself is a lot like the Super Saiyan transformation from Dragon Ball Z, in the sense where the thing that awakens in Overdrive to begin with is that the mind and body being pushed past their limits, mixed with a little bit of emotional distress. That are ultimately the two factors that that ultimately like cause it to awaken, cause the power to awaken. So while you could say friendship does play a part, there is still certain other conditions you almost got to meet to awaken it, which in the case of, which if you think about the case of Shiki's first awakening, is that his mind practically snapped. Like in Shiki's case, remembering the past and the fact that he was killed by Draken Joe, remembering all that information, it practically causes something in his mind to snap, and he just kind of, it's because of that that trauma of the event that caused his mind to awaken the power. Although I do admit, Shiki being able to read Draken's thoughts is still the part of this that's a little screwy to me, and more than a little forced in my opinion. Like, it does feel like Majima was a way of trying to show Shiki genuinely sympathize with Draken, but it doesn't entirely work either, because Draken Joe himself, even from like despite the backstory and despite how and why he did what he did up to this point, it doesn't mean that there's really much room to sympathize with him either, honestly. Like, his actions are still pretty bad. Of course, the next villain after this is going to be even worse, so yeah. With that said, this episode, and honestly this arc as a whole, does something that I honestly feel Majima doesn't get enough credit for, which is how he can so effortlessly give us a new perspective on characters by giving us false impressions. And yes, I am talking about Weiss's flashback here, because let's be real about it, Sabir was far from the most complex character when we first met him. Like, he was really just a little more than a thug. But through getting introduced to his older version of Sabir, we not only learned so much more about Professor Weiss was like, and how similar yet different he is from the Weiss we've come to know. I mean, obviously they're the same person, but still. But it more importantly gives so much more perspective on Sabir, that, yeah, when we met him, he was a thug, but there was a side to him that Shiki and Rebecca Shiki, Rebecca, and even Pino never got to truly see. And one that only Weiss is familiar with. Like, Sabir was the one who was there for Weiss when his mother died. He was the one Weiss could turn to when there was no one else. Yet he was ultimately Weiss's friend in a lot of ways. Yet it was because of their falling out that caused Sabir and Weiss to go different paths, start to change, all that shit. Like, it is kind of that idea that there are always two sides to one story. And granted, beyond this point in the story, beyond this point in Zero, Majima does get mixed results in the use of this storytelling method. But I do give an A for effort in the sense, with Sabir and definitely with Draken, in the sense where in the case of both characters, it is the one instance where you can kind of genuinely believe that this is probably something that did happen in the past, and something that we just never got to see from the current day perspective. And it feels like we're seeing a side, like it's one of those things where it feels like we're seeing a side of this character that was hidden from our view, and just a great use of how you can give more development to a blank slate character. Like, Sabir, again, is largely in some ways a blank slate character, but through all this, we're seeing that different perspective. I also, well, on a more minor note, I like how this flashback put a pin on the idea that machines are truly the only ones who can teach humans ether gear, as they're the only ones with knowledge of it, similar to dragons and dragon slaying magic. So again, a small little detail, but one I kind of like. Now, if I was to point something out that I'm generally mixed on in this chapter, in this episode, it's Draken's monster form design, and just seeing his mind deteriorate, because there's a lot of moments where, don't get me wrong, I generally like across the board how the anime handled like Draken Joe's like monster form, monster design, all that. But for every moment it feels like that it worked, there feels like one or two moments where it feels like the anime downplayed the sort of grotesque nature of said transformation. Like, this is one of those things where when it comes to Majima's artwork, he really leans into the body horror a lot of the times. And with this monster form, it was no different. The manga really went all out with this one, and here the anime did too, but it feels like they took something away from the initial design as well. And it's just one of those things where it's not as morbidly effective, I guess you could say. Then again, I wonder if it is largely because I'm a manga reader, and I might feel differently if I was looking at this from the perspective of an anime only, I guess. Also, I'm not gonna lie, it's only after revisiting the whole thing with the satellite in the anime that it only feels inconsequential to the rest of the plot. Like, the whole thing with the satellite just felt like it kind of just came out of nowhere and left just as quickly. Like, ultimately, it felt like a side quest that could have been taken care of before all the big turning points of the arc happened, and Masamune forgot that he needed to take care of that, so it's like, I'll just throw it in there kind of thing. With that said, I also really appreciate... One thing I also really appreciated is that seeing older Sabir save Pino and just getting that little bit of closure for Pino in a way where she finally understands what Weiss had told her about Sabir. Like, she understands somewhat of the perspective of what Weiss is coming from and the type of, and just a glimpse. I think she starts through this arc. I think she's gotten a glimpse of what Sabir was really like back then. That, yeah, he wasn't always the evil bastard she had experienced and perceived him as because of her innate trauma and her innate experience with him. As in fact, the Sabir we've gotten is much more like the Sabir Weiss knew before their falling out, and is an interesting addition to the perspective of how age and growing old can really give one perspective on their faults and mistakes they've made in their past as well. So yeah, all pretty good there. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much all I've got for this review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, Analyst Crunchyroll. Be sure to notification bell, hit the subscribe button, and just sit around, guys. Dark Knight of Anime signing off. Later, everyone.